Well, thanks for joining us again and joining a number of people both in Canada and the United States and even some from around the world we're getting now in terms of tuning into Day to Day with Stock All Day. We try to give you some of the insights behind the headlines that you're not going to get day to day from mainstream media. Well, we've got a list of items that are going to raise your eyebrows, make you smile, and make you groan. We're going to start with Prime Minister Carney is heading to the U.S. Some people might think he's going down to see if he can revive the trade discussions, which were cut off when Canada began to post those ads that were attacking President Trump. It's proved to be not a very smart policy done by the Ontario government. Usually going into negotiations, you don't start out by putting up ads in the country of the person who's going to be opposite you on the trade negotiation table, attacking them and mocking them. But anyway, that has shown not to be very good. Is the Prime Minister going to be talking about trade? Well, he's going down there for the FIFA, for the World Football Association, and this isn't a game that's being played. It's a huge event as they decide what the schedule is going to be and which teams are going to be playing which. The president will be there. President of Mexico will be there. And Canadians or Americans who focus on things like football and hockey and baseball might be wondering why would the heads of state show up for something like this. Keep in mind that football, as is known as we call it soccer, is actually the most popular and most viewed sport in all the world. So this is a huge deal. And what they're hoping is that there's going to be something, all cameras are going to be watching these gentlemen, especially the Prime Minister of Canada and the President of the U.S. Are they going to have a little moment where they nod at each other, where they tap on the shoulders? Is Mr. Carney, Prime Minister Carney, going to be able to get some kind of signal in as far as the trade issues? And I'm saying don't put too much into this. They, of course, have regular channels where they can contact each other, but everybody's going to be watching that. In terms of worldwide and very popular sporting events, you may be surprised to know that Formula One racing, which of course has a huge audience around the world, the audience is growing considerably in leaps and bounds because more and more women are watching, and especially women in the 18 to 35-year-old bracket. That's, of course, the women with the greatest purchasing power, and really growing in leaps and bounds. We're seeing an F4 category. There's F1, which is the top category, and there have been from time to time women racing in that. F4 is a women's category, and what's significant there is the top 10 teams that are in the Formula One racing are all financially supporting the F4, which is where young drivers, especially young women drivers, may be moving up the ranks. So it's interesting to see big increase in watching Formula One racing. It helps also that when you have teams like the Red Bull team, their director of strategy is a woman. And she, the director of strategy, you've seen if you've watched any of these F1s or F1 type movies, the person, they have strategic people who are in direct contact at all times with the drivers. They're speaking into their ears. And this particular woman, Hannah Skitz, I hope I pronounced her last name correctly, is credited with helping the driver just win the F1. She was up on the podium with him. And so quite a thing for people to see a woman up there with all these guys, and interesting what's happening in F1. Switching back to the Canadian scene in British Columbia, the leader, the head of the BC, that's the British Columbia Conservative Party, that's not the federal party, just yesterday, the board of the Conservative Party of BC, including its president, voted overwhelmingly to tell him he's no longer leader. There was a vote in caucus that did not go well for him, with members of the legislature saying they want him out. Some are staying with him. And people might be thinking, like, what happened? I mean, just less than 2 years ago, the BC, the British Columbia Conservative Party, pulled off really a political miracle. I don't know that even in any other province you've seen where you had a case where they did not have even one member, one elected person in the legislature, and they were at about, well, almost immeasurable, undefinable at the polls in terms of any percentage. And then John Rustad, who was a member of the BC Liberal Party, he got punted out of that party because he said some things that weren't in line with what the party leadership said. Anyway, as some of you know, or if you don't know, the BC Party, Conservative Party, continued to grow. They picked up a few more MPs, and they went into the election and came within 3 seats, actually, of forming the government. It was huge. It was a political miracle. And so people are saying, well, how could things turn so quickly? How could the leader who accomplished that be on the outs and people wanting him gone? First of all, keep in mind that conservative parties generally are much tougher on their leaders. First of all, there's just the whole philosophical approach that conservatives, people who define themselves as small c conservative, put a very high premium on individual rights, on freedom of speech, and they very quickly ignite if a new leader appears to be going against those, and even to the place where many conservative thinking people, this was always a problem that plagued the former National Reform Party in Canada. They would put their, if they were upset individually, they would put that ahead even of winning the next election, and would rather just stay in the opposition and have their fights, because when a party is fighting amongst itself and doing that publicly, of course, it doesn't exactly send a message of strength and of confidence to the general public, who would think, you know, if they can't handle their own issues, how can they handle mine? So true to form, unfortunately for John Rustad, the Conservatives, who love to shoot their own, have decided that John Rustad is going to be out. We're going to have to see how this all unfolds and what it's going to mean in terms of leadership, but pretty dramatic turnaround there in about a 2-year timeline. And looking at a 2-year timeline, well, it's going to be a little more than 2 years, about 3 years. The next president will be elected in the United States, but of course the race there starts well ahead of time. And Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has been seen by some as a front runner. He's one of the most left-leaning and woke politicians that have been on the scene outside of California, at least for some time. But people are saying he's the guy, and usually has Hollywood behind him. But Halle Berry, you know Halle, she was in James Bond movie and done other things, of course, in her career, very well-known woman. She has come out hard against him, against Gavin Newsom. This is going to be a bit of a smack to his leadership potential, because she's saying he does not value women. He sees women as second class. That's going to be harsh. That's going to be difficult for him. Now, a little bit of advice to him if he wants to push back on this. The reason Halle Berry is saying this is because he's not funding. He's vetoed some funding that multi-millions of dollars that go for various prescriptions that women can take for issues related to menopause. And he has voted against that. So it's maybe not just the fact that he's not being considerate enough about women, but Halle Berry herself has a company which is involved in menopausal products, different things that women take to help them through that challenging time. And maybe she's also being motivated by that. That's going to affect her company quite a bit for whatever reason. That's an early hit against Gavin Newsom. We'll see what happens. In mayoralty races, and I'm telling people in Canada this and in the US, and I help out on various elections at various levels, mayoralty races are increasingly becoming very important as mayors and councillors take on issues and start driving in laneways that have never before been seen to be in the bailiwick of municipal government. And so what we're seeing develop in Canada and in the US, mayoralty races really define what are the political divides in the country or the province or the state. We saw that for sure in New York City, overwhelming support voting in Mayor Mondami, and very well-known avowed communist, if not socialist. We saw the same thing happen in the municipal election just shortly after that in Seattle. Now in Miami, the two people that are in the finals for the mayoralty race, you've got Emilio Gonzalez. He would be the Republican, or for Canadians, he'd be on the conservative side. and Eileen Higgs is running, and she's actually in the lead right now. They have a runoff event, and then the top two, if nobody gets more than 50%, the top two contenders will go into the runoff. So Eileen is ahead with, at least at the last vote, when they came down to the final two, which will be coming up on December 9th. She had 35% of the vote, and Emilio Gonzalez had 19% of the vote. Looks like that would be a pretty strong suggestion that he's far behind. But to show you the importance of these municipal elections, President Trump and the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, have both been very vocal, come out very strong for the underdog here, for Mr. Gonzalez. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes, but it shows the increased importance of mayoralty races. So if you are interested at all and involved and want to be involved in politics and helping out and helping decide who's going to win or lose, you need to realize municipal races are increasingly important. The other reason they're important is municipal councilors tend to get overwhelmed even more easily than state, province, or federal officials by their administrations. Their administrations are talented people when it comes to the area of the administration of municipalities. And councilors tell me all the time, whether they're councilors on the left or the right, they just get overwhelmed by the numbers and the facts that the cities, that their administration brings to them. And often they just go along with whatever the administration says. It takes a strong mayor and a strong council to say, yeah, you are council, you are administrators. Yes, it is your job as bureaucrats to bring us facts and figures, but we'll make the decisions. But most mayors simply cave into what the administration wants. So if you're looking and going to be involved in municipal elections, this is increasingly going to affect your taxes. It's going to increasingly affect whether businesses grow and whether housing continues on in your city. So I would suggest you take a close look. President Trump has upped the ante again in terms of making the U.S. a more favorable place to do business than companies looking to invest, let's say, in Canada or in Europe. And European countries are looking more and more to the U.S. because of what he and his team are doing in terms of environmental regulations. And what they're requiring is any existing regulations. They're requiring the administrators, and this is a good lesson for those of you interested at the municipal level, requiring the administrators to prove, even mathematically or scientifically, why a certain regulation is needed. They're going to have to come up with reasons for it if it's going to get approved. They're going to be a lot tougher on that. And nothing against regulators or administrators, but remember, a regulator is somebody who is paid to regulate. That's what he or she does. We say that, give a regulator a hammer and everything starts to look like a nail. And that's why they have to be able to prove with clear, in some cases scientific or economic information, why a regulation is needed. We used to like to say at the provincial level, if you want a regulation brought in, first of all, you've got to tell us who will die if the regulation is not brought in, who is opposed to the regulation and why. And the people opposed to it, have they had a fair time and a fair shake at explaining why they're opposed? Well, that's the approach the Trump administration has been taking to regulations. And in that process, on the energy side, anybody who's got a project, let's say liquid natural gas project, are going to be somewhat pleased to hear that the Trump administration is finding in many cases where these were not permitted because maybe it was an area that was deemed too sensitive, maybe there was some caribou in the area or some particular plant life that might go extinct, whatever it might be. And with lack of scientific proof that there's a need for the regulation, those regulations are being struck down, which means that businesses, small or large, can look with some certainty at building and hiring people and expanding. And not just in the area of energy production, but energy in general, and on the area of emissions. They've struck down two pretty tough laws to do with appliances, new appliances. I've heard from individuals, including my daughters-in-law, my wife and her friends, that some of the regulations have really impaired what they think is the efficiency and also the cost of appliances. And included in this report that the Trump team looked at dishwashers, for instance, because of the regulators saying, well, we've got to save the planet, and so you've got to buy these new dishwashers that restrict the amount of water flow and restrict the amount of heat. And so dishwashers, new dishwashers, are taking up, as they've been measuring them in the labs, anywhere from 1.5 hours to 4 hours more than the usual time that dishwashers used to take to go through the various cycles. That's creating all kinds of problems and frustration. And the other thing that it's good to use this as an example, because the other offsetting pressures that come to bear are never or rarely measured. For instance, because of the amount of time it takes, and dishwashers don't have the same power under these new regulations, people are spending more time rinsing and washing that dish or that pot and pan in the sink before they even put it in the dishwasher. This, of course, results in more water being used before it gets in the dishwasher, more heat being used to heat the water that's coming out of the tap. And when they've taken it all into consideration, they found the impact on the environment is not even measurable. You can't even measure it. And so they're saying, why go to the extra cost and the extra inefficiency? So they've dropped some of those regulations. The same on stoves. You may be aware, and here's where municipalities come in again. Some municipalities are actually requiring people now to register their gas stoves like they would register a gun. And there was restrictions on the use of gas, nitrous oxide that is made as a byproduct. And those restrictions are making gas stoves more inefficient and more costly. One of the tests they did, they found out that all natural gas emissions, all of it, everything coming out of natural gas stoves all across the country is less than 1% of all emissions. And so, quite rightly, the question is being asked, why this huge expense? Why the loss of efficiency on something that is making no difference? And that's the approach the Trump people are taking generally to regulations, and it's resulting in more of a common sense approach, but it's also resulting in a more favorable environment for businesses that want to start up, that want to hire people, that want to provide good long-term employment. So we're watching those and watching the whole issue of favorability of starting a business being much more favorable in Canada than in the US, and therefore Canadian investors and possibly businesses moving south of the border, not a good thing. You've been watching, and we know about the huge increase in AI, and that's going to continue. There is just no stopping it. The chips that are resolved, whether we're talking about the memory chips themselves or the AI chips, are starting to, and have been, rapidly going up in price, and it's a matter of supply. For instance, one of the factors, the country of Taiwan, which produces a huge amount, in fact, a majority of these semiconductor chips, because of the threat to China, from China, about closing down the Straits of Taiwan. Because of that, companies are actually stockpiling. And when they can access the chips, they are buying huge amounts. NVIDIA just announced they've just purchased approximately a 3-year supply of the semiconductor chips. So cost going up, that means cost going up into your device, whatever you are going to be using that for. So definitely something you want to be looking at in that regard. On the area interesting in terms of the culture scene in Canada and in the US, specifically in Canada right now, interesting remarks made by Candace Cameron Bure. You remember her from Full House and other productions. A very successful woman in her field in entertainment, and has been operating for a few years now within the faith-based movie industry and television industry, and involved in major production work there. She talks today and yesterday about being canceled, just as her production company was going and starting to show good signs. cancel and the abuse and the hatred that she ran into. And she was asked a question, this was some time ago, she asked the question, would her production company, which features what she calls family-centered, family-based movies and TV shows, would they in one of their movies feature a gay couple? And she has more or less said, I'm not going to put exact words, she said, they will hire people of all, whatever, races, ethnicities, whatever it may be, even orientations, depending on their skills and on merit. But since their family productions, in her view, are based on Christian interpretation, she probably wouldn't feature a same-sex couple in one of her movies, not at least as the feature actors. Well, that unleashed, as some people like to say, holy hell upon her. And she continues to face considerable onslaught, not just criticism, but some pretty vicious attacks. And when she was asked, well, how do you handle that? How do you get through that? Did you need therapy? Did you need anxiety drugs? How did you pull through that very difficult time, and even still difficult to today? And she replied by saying, James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. And a lot of people say, well, what on earth does that mean? Who's James? Of course, James is one of the brothers of Jesus and was the first bishop of Jerusalem, but he also wrote a book which has been faithfully translated and is part of the New Testament. And in that it says, count it all joy when you fall into all these different kinds of pressures. So as we wind up the podcast for today, think of that, whatever you're going through, who's insulting you, who's attacking you. If you can correct the problem, if it's something you've done wrong, then do it. And if it's not something that you have done wrong, but something you feel strongly about, you know what? Count it all joy. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.